Emily Carter had always believed that love was more than just physical attraction. She wanted a deep connection, built on trust and respect. But time and time again her boyfriends left her for the same reason. She refused to give herself to them. She thought Jason Mitchell was different. They had been together for 2 years, and he always seemed patient. But on their second anniversary, everything changed. That night, Jason picked Emily up from her house, saying he had a surprise for her. She expected a romantic dinner at one of the high-end restaurants on Victoria Island. Instead, he drove to Echo Hotel and Suites. "What are we doing here? I thought we were going to a restaurant," Emily asked, confused. Jason smiled. "I have something special planned for us. Come on." She hesitated but followed him inside. He got a key from the front desk, and they took the elevator to the 5th floor. Emily felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Maybe he had arranged something romantic. But as they entered the room, her heart sank. There were no flowers, no candles, just a plain hotel room. "Jason, what's going on?" she asked. "This," he said, closing the door and locking it. He turned to her with a serious look. "I love you, Emily. It's time we take the next step." Emily's stomach twisted. "Jason, we've talked about this. I don't want to do this before marriage." Jason's face darkened. "We've been together for 2 years, Emily. My friends laugh at me because I haven't been with you. Do you even love me?" Emily's hands trembled. "Love isn't just about this, Jason. You said you respected my choice." Jason grabbed her arm and pulled her closer. "Emily, stop being so difficult. Look at the way you dress. You tease me all the time, but now you act innocent." His words cut deep. She tried to pull away, but he held her tighter. When he pushed her onto the bed and leaned over her, Emily panicked. "Stop it, Jason!" she shouted, shoving him with all her strength. He froze for a moment, then smirked. "You'll like it if you just relax." Emily's fear turned to anger. Without thinking, she slapped him hard. Jason recoiled, stunned. "You're disgusting," she spat, standing up and fixing her dress. "We're done. Don't ever come near me again." Jason reached for her, but she grabbed her bag and stormed out, her heart pounding. She didn't cry. She was too tired of crying over men who only wanted one thing. She wandered through the city, her mind spinning. She had thought Jason was different. She had trusted him. Now all she felt was emptiness. She ended up at a bar. She never drank much, but tonight she wanted to forget. "Tequila," she muttered to the bartender. 1 drink turned into 3, then 5. Soon the world blurred around her. A deep voice spoke beside her. "You've had enough." Emily turned to see a man sitting next to her. He was tall, well-dressed, with piercing green eyes. "Who are you to tell me that? Are you my boyfriend?" she slurred. The man chuckled. "No, but I can be." Emily laughed, the alcohol making her bold. "You're ridiculous," he smirked. "Where are your friends?" "I don't have any friends here," she admitted. The man frowned. "You shouldn't be drinking alone. Let me take you home." Emily shook her head. "Number, take me to your place." His eyebrows lifted. "Are you sure?" "Just do it," she insisted. The next thing she knew, she was in his car. She barely remembered walking into a penthouse apartment in Banana Island. He sat her on the bed. "Do you need water? Food?" Emily looked up at him, her vision hazy. "I need you." The man stilled. "Emily, you're drunk." She leaned closer, running a hand over his chest. "You look handsome enough." He exhaled sharply. "You're not thinking straight." "I don't care," she whispered, pulling him into a kiss. She didn't know why she felt this way. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was the pain of betrayal. Maybe she wanted to prove to herself that she was desirable. The man hesitated, but eventually responded. His touch was gentle yet firm, nothing like Jason's forceful grip. The fire between them grew, and neither of them stopped. That night, Emily gave herself to a man whose name she didn't even know, and the next morning she woke up alone. Emily woke up to the soft morning light filtering through the large windows. Her head pounded, and her mouth felt dry. She blinked several times, trying to adjust to her surroundings. The bed was unfamiliar, large, luxurious, and covered in white sheets. Then it hit her. She shot up, gripping the sheets tightly. The events of the night before came rushing back. The bar, the drinks, the stranger, the kisses, the passion. Her heart pounded. She turned her head, expecting to see him, but the space beside her was empty. She was alone. Emily quickly scanned the room. There was no sign of the man from last night. His clothes, his scent, his presence. Everything was gone. Her stomach twisted. What had she done? She swung her legs off the bed, gripping her forehead. Her dress lay on the floor, along with her heels. She felt a wave of shame wash over her. She had spent years protecting herself, refusing to give in to pressure. Yet one night of pain and alcohol had changed everything. As she reached for her dress, she spotted something on the bedside table, a neatly folded note. "I had to leave early. Hope you're okay. Take care." No name, no phone number, nothing. Emily swallowed hard. She didn't know whether to be relieved or hurt. She had given herself to a stranger, and now he was gone. Fighting the lump in her throat, she got dressed quickly. She needed to get out of there. She grabbed her bag and hurried out of the penthouse. Outside, the streets were already bustling with luxury cars and early morning joggers. Emily flagged down a cab and gave the driver her friend's address in Lekki Phase 1. When she got to Sophia's house, she let herself in quietly. She prayed Sophia was still asleep. She wasn't ready to talk. But as soon as she stepped inside, Sophia appeared from the kitchen with a steaming cup of coffee in her hand. "Where the hell have you been?" Sophia asked, arms crossed. Emily sighed, removing her heels and collapsing onto the couch. "Don't ask." Sophia walked over, sitting beside her. "Emily, what happened?" Emily hesitated. Then, in a quiet voice, she admitted, "I slept with someone." Sophia nearly spilled her coffee. "What? Who?" "I don't know," Emily whispered, staring at the floor. Sophia's eyes widened. "You mean a total stranger?" Emily nodded, guilt twisting inside her. "I was drunk. I don't even remember his name. I don't even remember his face clearly." Sophia let out a low whistle. "Wow, this is not like you at all." "I know," Emily whispered, rubbing her temples. "I don't know what got into me." Sophia sighed, placing a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. "Look, what's done is done. Just take it as a lesson and move on. No use dwelling on it." Emily nodded. She wanted to forget. She had to forget. But 2 months later, forgetting became impossible. Emily sat in her small room, staring at the pregnancy test in her hand. The 2 red lines were clear. She didn't need a doctor to confirm it. She was pregnant. Her hands shook. This couldn't be happening. She took another test, then another, all positive. Tears blurred her vision. How could she let this happen? She had been careful her whole life. How could one reckless night change everything? She heard Sophia's footsteps outside her room. Before she could hide the test, Sophia walked in. "Hey, I got Suya and—" Sophia stopped mid-sentence, her eyes landing on the test kit in Emily's hand. For a moment, there was silence. Then Sophia whispered, "Oh, my God, Emily, you're pregnant?" Emily bit her lip, nodding slowly. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Sophia sat beside her, pulling her into a hug. "It's going to be okay." "No, it's not," Emily choked out. "I don't even know who the father is." Sophia pulled back. "Wait, do you remember anything at all? His name, his number, where he lives?" Emily shook her head. "Nothing. All I know is that he was rich. He lived in a penthouse in Banana Island. That's it." Sophia frowned. "We can try going back to the bar. Maybe someone there knows him." Emily hesitated, but she knew she had no choice. She needed answers. The next day, Emily and Sophia took a taxi to Moist Beach Club in Onaru. The place looked different during the day, empty and quiet. They approached the bartender, a muscular man with a thick Igbo accent. "Excuse me," Emily said. "Do you remember me? I was here 2 months ago, very drunk. I left with a man. Do you know who he was?" The bartender studied her for a moment, then shook his head. "Sorry, I see too many faces." Frustration boiled inside her. "Please, he was tall, well-dressed, had green eyes. He paid my bill." The bartender's expression flickered. He seemed to remember something. "Oh, him? Yeah, I know the guy. He owns the bar." Emily's heart pounded. "What's his name?" The bartender shrugged. "Boss doesn't like people knowing his business, but he doesn't stay in Nigeria for long. Comes and goes." Emily's stomach dropped. "Do you know when he'll be back?" "No idea." She turned to Sophia, feeling hopeless. Sophia grabbed her hand. "We'll find him, Emily, one way or another." Emily wasn't sure if she wanted to find him. She had already lost control of her life. Now she had to figure out how to raise a child on her own. 8 months had passed since that night. Emily Carter had accepted that she might never see the father of her child again. She had stopped searching. There was no use in chasing a ghost. At this point, her priority was her unborn baby. She had moved on from the shame, from the regrets, from the sleepless nights wondering who he was. Now, all she wanted was to be a good mother. Her best friend, Sophia Reynolds, had been her rock. When her parents disowned her, Sophia let her stay in her apartment in Lekki Phase 1, helping her through morning sickness and endless cravings. Emily had also started working online, taking freelance writing jobs to save money for when the baby arrived. She knew she wouldn't have Sophia's help forever. She had to be independent. But everything changed one rainy afternoon in Ikoyi. Emily had just left her routine antenatal appointment at Echo Hospital when she felt a sharp pain in her belly. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was just normal pregnancy discomfort. But as she walked toward the road to hail a taxi, the pain grew stronger. She stopped, gripping a streetlight pole for support. Sweat broke out on her forehead, and her breath quickened. Something was wrong. A car horn honked loudly nearby. She turned her head, barely able to focus. A sleek, black Range Rover Velar had stopped in front of her. The driver's door swung open, and a tall, well-dressed man stepped out, rushing toward her. "Miss, are you all right?" he asked, his deep voice filled with concern. Emily could barely stand straight. She gasped, clutching her stomach. I think I'm about to give birth." The man hesitated for only a second before acting fast. He placed an arm around her waist and carefully led her to the passenger seat of his car. "Hold on," he said. "I'll take you to the hospital." Emily barely registered what was happening. The pain was unbearable. She could hear the man speaking, but his voice sounded distant. Her vision blurred. The last thing she saw before darkness took over was the stranger's face, his sharp jawline, piercing green eyes, and familiar features. Emily slowly opened her eyes to the beeping sounds of a heart monitor. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. She blinked, trying to adjust to the bright hospital lights. She was in a private hospital room. Her hands instinctively went to her belly. It was flat. Panic gripped her. "My baby," she whispered. Just then, a nurse walked in, smiling warmly. "Congratulations, madam. You delivered a healthy baby girl." Emily exhaled in relief. "She's in the nursery. Would you like to see her?" Emily nodded, still feeling weak. The nurse left the room. A few seconds later, the door opened again. This time, it wasn't the nurse. It was him, the man from the bar, the father of her child. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She stared at him, heart pounding. He looked just as shocked as she was. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he finally broke the silence. "You," he whispered. "It's you." Emily swallowed hard. Who are you?" The man ran a hand through his neatly trimmed hair, exhaling sharply. "Nathaniel Wilkins, but most people call me Nate." Nathaniel. Emily clenched her fists. She had spent months wondering about him, searching for him, only for fate to throw him into her life when she least expected it. "You're the one from that night," she said. Nate nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yes." Emily's hands trembled. "You left. You didn't even say your name." "I had to leave early that morning," Nate admitted. "I got an emergency call and had to fly out of Lagos immediately. I wanted to find you, but I didn't know your name. You disappeared, and I ended up pregnant." Nate's eyes widened slightly, as if the weight of her words had just hit him. He turned to the side, rubbing his jaw. Then he looked back at her. "I didn't know," he said quietly. Emily scoffed. "Of course you didn't. You left, and I had to figure everything out on my own. Do you know what it was like?" There was a beat of silence before Nate spoke. "I'm sorry." His voice was firm, sincere. Emily studied him, unsure of what to say. She had imagined this moment so many times, seeing him again, confronting him, but now that he was here, she felt overwhelmed. Just then the nurse returned, pushing a small crib with a tiny bundle inside. "Here's your baby, madam," she said cheerfully. Emily's anger faded the moment she saw her daughter. The nurse lifted the baby into her arms, and Emily felt her heart melt. The baby was so small, so fragile. Her tiny fingers curled into a fist, and Emily couldn't help but smile. "She's beautiful," the nurse said. "She looks like you." But as Emily looked closer, she noticed something else. The baby had green eyes, just like Nate. She swallowed hard and glanced up at him. Nate stared at the baby, his expression unreadable. He took a step closer, his gaze locked onto his daughter. "She has my eyes," he murmured. Emily's chest tightened. She had spent so long preparing to raise this baby alone, but now the father was standing right in front of her, and she had no idea what to do next. Emily sat in her hospital bed, staring down at the tiny baby in her arms, her daughter, her beautiful little girl with soft brown skin and striking green eyes, eyes that mirrored the man standing in front of her, Nathaniel Wilkins, the man she had spent months trying to forget, the father of her child. Nate stood frozen, his gaze locked onto the baby. His face held a mix of shock and something else, something Emily couldn't quite place. He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes flickering between Emily and the newborn. "She's mine?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. Emily tightened her grip on the baby. "Yes." Silence filled the room. Nate exhaled and ran a hand over his face, clearly trying to process everything. He paused, shaking his head. "I didn't know." Emily scoffed. "Of course you didn't. You left that morning and never looked back." His jaw tightened. "I didn't leave because I wanted to. I had an emergency and had to travel immediately." Emily's fingers clenched around the baby's blanket. "And you couldn't even leave a phone number? A name? Anything?" Nate sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I wasn't expecting that night to mean anything. I thought it was just a mistake." Emily cut in, her tone sharp. His lips pressed into a thin line. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Emily looked away, feeling the sting of his words. "Well, whether it was a mistake or not, it happened, and now there's a child involved." Nate stepped closer, his eyes softening as he looked at the baby. "She's beautiful," he murmured. Emily swallowed hard. "She's my world." He looked at her then, his green eyes filled with something unreadable. "You went through this whole pregnancy alone?" Emily nodded. "My parents disowned me when I couldn't tell them who the father was. The only person who stood by me was Sophia." Nate's expression darkened. "Your parents disowned you?" "Yes." She looked away, her voice bitter. "They thought I was irresponsible, said I embarrassed them, told me not to come back until I had a husband." Nate was quiet for a long moment. Then he exhaled. "I'm sorry, Emily." She scoffed. "Don't apologize. You don't owe me anything." "That's not true," he said. Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" Nate met her gaze. "She's my daughter, too. I want to be in her life." Emily's heart pounded. She hadn't expected that. "You want to be in her life?" she repeated, trying to process his words. "Yes." His voice was steady. "I may not have been there from the start, but I want to be here now." Emily stared at him, searching for any sign of insincerity, but his eyes held nothing but determination. She sighed, glancing down at her daughter. "This isn't just about you wanting to be around when it's convenient." "I know." Emily looked up at him again. "Then what do you expect, Nate? You want shared custody? Visitations? What exactly are you saying?" He hesitated. Then he took a deep breath. "I want to take responsibility. I want to be a father to her, a real father." Emily's heart clenched. A part of her had always wished that her child wouldn't grow up without a father, but could she really trust Nate? She looked down at the tiny baby in her arms, her heart filled with both love and uncertainty. "She deserves to know her father," Nate continued, "and I want to be that for her." Emily sighed heavily. "Fine, but we take things slow. I'm not going to just hand her over to you." Nate nodded. "That's fair." Silence settled between them again. But this time, it wasn't as tense. Nate took another step forward, looking at the baby with wonder. Can I hold her?" Emily hesitated, but after a moment, she carefully placed the baby in his arms. Nate held her gently, his large hands supporting her tiny body. He looked down at her, his expression softening in a way Emily had never seen before. The baby yawned, her small fingers curling around one of Nate's fingers. He let out a shaky breath, clearly overwhelmed. Emily watched him closely. She had been prepared for him to walk away, to make excuses. But seeing him now, she realized something. He wasn't just saying words, he meant them. And for the first time since that night, she felt a small flicker of hope. Emily watched as Nate cradled their daughter, his expression unreadable. He was holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, his green eyes softening with every breath the tiny baby took. She should have felt relief that he wanted to be in their child's life. Instead, doubt and fear crept into her heart. Nate looked up at her. "She's so small," he murmured, still in awe. "She was born early," Emily said. "The doctor said she's healthy, but she needs extra care." He nodded, gently rocking the baby. "I'll do whatever it takes to be there for her." Emily crossed her arms. "It's easy to say that now. But what about later? What happens when your life gets too busy?" Nate frowned. "You don't trust me," she scoffed. "Should I? You disappeared after that night. You don't get to waltz in now and act like you're the perfect father." His jaw tightened. "I didn't choose to leave, Emily. I had an emergency. I didn't even know your name. I had no way to find you." Emily let out a sharp breath. "And what if I hadn't collapsed in front of your car? Would you have ever found me?" Nate didn't answer right away. His silence made her heart clench. "I would have," he finally said. "Eventually, I would have." Emily shook her head, turning away. She didn't want to admit how much his words hurt. Nate sighed. "Look, I get why you're upset, but I'm here now. I don't want my daughter growing up without her father." Emily closed her eyes. A part of her wanted to believe him, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than he was letting on. Then something hit her. She turned back to him. "Why are you really here, Nate? Is it because of her?" She gestured to their daughter. "Or is it because I remind you of someone?" His brows furrowed. "What?" "I overheard your sister talking," Emily said, watching his reaction closely. "She said I look like someone named Ari." Nate's entire body stiffened. Emily's stomach dropped. She took a step forward. "Who is she, Nate?" He hesitated, then exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "Ari was someone I cared about a long time ago." Emily's heart pounded. "And? Did you love her?" Nate met her gaze. "Yes." The answer hit her like a slap. She felt foolish. She had spent months wondering why he was suddenly so determined to be in her life, and now she had her answer. She wasn't special. She was just a reminder of someone he had lost. Emily let out a bitter laugh. "So that's why you suddenly want to be a father? Because I look like some woman from your past?" Nate's expression darkened. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" she snapped. "If I didn't look like her, would you still be here?" His eyes flashed with frustration. "Emily, I'm here because I want to be, not because of anyone else," she scoffed. "I don't believe you." Nate set the baby down gently in her crib before facing Emily again. "I won't lie to you. Yes, when I first saw you, you reminded me of Ari, but that's not why I'm here now." Emily crossed her arms, trying to ignore the ache in her chest. "Then tell me, why are you here?" Nate exhaled. "Because I care about you, and because I love my daughter." Emily's breath caught. He took a step closer. "I didn't realize it that night. I didn't even realize it when I found you again. But when I saw you holding her, when I saw what you went through alone, I knew I couldn't walk away." Emily looked away, blinking back tears. "I don't know if I can believe you." Nate gently lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Then let me prove it to you." For the first time, she saw something different in his gaze, something real. But was it enough? She didn't know, and that scared her more than anything. Emily sat on the edge of her bed in the early morning light, heart heavy with conflict. Her daughter's soft giggles drifted from the living room where Nate was entertaining her with a silly cartoon. Emily's chest tightened with mixed emotions. On one hand, the sight of them bonding warmed her heart. On the other, doubts gnawed at her. How could she be sure Nate wouldn't disappear again and leave them both hurt? She ran a hand through her hair, recalling the sleepless nights she'd spent worrying. What if he leaves? What if he hurts our daughter? These questions tumbled through her mind, echoing the fears she'd harbored for years. Emily knew she had to decide how much to let Nate into their lives, but the weight of that decision was overwhelming. "Mama?" Her daughter's voice snapped Emily out of her reverie. She looked up to see the little girl standing in the doorway, clutching her favorite stuffed bunny. Behind her stood Nate, concern in his eyes. Emily forced a reassuring smile. "Good morning, sweetie. Everything okay?" she asked, kneeling to her child's level. Her daughter nodded, eyes shining. "Nate made pancakes. Can we have breakfast together?" she asked eagerly. Emily's gaze flickered to Nate. He offered a tentative smile and held up a plate as evidence. "Hope you don't mind. I thought I'd surprise you both," he said softly. Emily's heart did a small flip. The simple domestic gesture caught her off guard. For a moment, she imagined what it would be like to have this every day. A father for her child at the breakfast table, a partner by her side. It was everything she had once wanted. But the old hurt reminded her to be cautious. She took a slow breath and nodded. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful," she replied. Nate's gestures of sincerity. Over the next few days, Nate made conscious efforts to prove he was here to stay. He started with the practical things, offering financial support and showing up consistently. One afternoon, Emily found him in her kitchen with a neatly organized folder of documents. Nate cleared his throat nervously. "I did some research and set up a college savings account for our daughter," he explained, sliding the folder toward Emily. "It's already funded. I want to contribute to her future in every way I can." Emily's eyes widened as she thumbed through the papers. It was something she hadn't expected. Financial burden was one of the things she had silently struggled with, and seeing Nate step up in this way touched her. That wasn't the only thing Nate did. He became a steady presence in their daughter's routine. Each evening, he would show up to take them out for a casual walk in the neighborhood or help with bedtime stories. One night, as Emily stood by the doorway of her daughter's room, she watched Nate gently brushing the little girl's hair. It was intimate and real, a father caring for his child. When the story was read and their daughter drifted off to sleep, Nate stepped out into the hallway, careful to close the door quietly. He found Emily standing there, tears unexpectedly shining in her eyes. "Emily, are you all right?" he asked in a whisper, concern evident. Emily hadn't realized she was crying until he spoke. Embarrassed, she wiped at her cheeks. "I'm fine," she whispered back. "It's just seeing you with her. I'm not used to it." Before meeting Nate's family, another confrontation loomed. Emily knew she had to tell her own parents that Nate was back. One evening, she invited her mother and father over for dinner, steeling herself for their reactions. When her parents arrived, they walked right into Nate, who was leaving her apartment after dropping off a toy their daughter had left in his car. The front door opened to reveal Emily's father and mother on the doorstep, and Nate standing in the entryway holding a pink stuffed unicorn. "Nate," her father said stiffly, a cold edge to his voice, "what are you doing here?" Before Emily could answer, her mother stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. "We were worried about you, dear," she said to Emily, though her eyes never left Nate. Emily swallowed hard. "Mom, Dad, let's all sit down," she pleaded. Reluctantly, her parents moved inside. Emily's father made a skeptical noise and looked Nate up and down. "It's a little late for doing right, isn't it?" he said. Nate took the reprimand without flinching. He nodded, accepting the blame. "I deserve that," he admitted quietly. "Mr. Thompson, you're absolutely right. I wasn't there, and it was wrong. I regret it deeply." Emily's mother put a gentle hand on Emily's arm. "We trust your judgment, sweetheart. We just don't want to see either of you get hurt again," she said softly. Emily nodded, tears pricking at her eyes. "I know, I'm scared too," she confessed, "but I have to give him a chance. If I don't, I'll always wonder, and our little girl would always wonder." Her father let out a weary sigh and looked directly at Nate. "You'd better not squander this," Nate nodded solemnly. "I understand, sir. I won't let them down again." Tension eased in the room as the initial shock gave way to tentative understanding. Later that evening, after an emotional day, Nate drove Emily and their daughter home. The child had fallen asleep in the back seat. Emily found herself studying Nate's profile as he drove. The slight smile on his face told her how happy he was. They hadn't spoken since leaving his parents' house, both absorbing the events of the day. Now, Nate's thumb brushed lightly over her knuckles. "Thank you for today," he said softly. "It meant a lot to my family and to me." Emily felt a warmth spread through her. "It meant a lot to us, too," she admitted, "seeing your parents embrace our daughter like that. I didn't realize how much I wanted that for her until now." Back in the living room, the day's emotions finally caught up with Emily. Tears welled up as she thought of how far they had come.